This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Agon Erev Shabbos. It's a great honor to be here. I want to share with you this morning an approach to the parashiyos of Truma, Tetzaveh, Vayakel, Pekudei, a revolutionary approach by focusing and studying some of the ingredients that were used in the creation of the Mishkan. We're familiar that there were a number of items in the Mishkan that were almost supernatural, that dated back in time, from time immemorial. Let's begin with the Briach HaTichain. We read about it in Truma, we read about it in this week's parsha in Vayakel. The pasuk says, "V'habriach HaTichain b'soich HaKrashim." The middle bar, in middle of the planks, Mavriach min HaKatzah HaKatzah, ran through from one end to the other. Where did the Briach HaTichain come from? So we're familiar with what it says in Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. By the way, Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, which was not written by Rabbi Yonasan ben Uziel. It's the Achronim call it Targum Hamayuchas Yonasan ben Uziel. Yonasan ben Uziel, clearly from the Gemara Megillah, only wrote Targum on Nevi'im and Ksuvim. He did not write Al Torah. The name Targum Yonasan ben Uziel was created by the printers in order to distinguish between Talmud Yerushalmi and another version of Talmud Yerushalmi, so they called it Yonasan ben Uziel. But it's an authentic Targum. He says, "V'nigra mitziyah b'goy luchaya, mishalbeish min siyav l'siyav min ilana didn't save Avraham b've'era d'shava." Where did it come from? It came from the tree that Avram Avinu planted. He set up in Beersheva to house the Orchim. So here we encounter an amazing tidbit that the Briach HaTichain was not ordinary wood. This came all the way back from Avraham Avinu. What's interesting is this is not the only item that was used to construct the Mishkan that dated back to the Avos HaKadoshim. There was another item that came from something prepared by the Avos. We know the Mishkan was built primarily based from the Krashim. The pasuk says, "V'yasisa es hakerashim la Mishkan." Rashi's bothered. What's hakerashim? It should say, "V'yasisa kerashim." What does Rashi say? Me'oisan ha'oimdin u'miyuchadam lekach. From the special designated planks that Yaakov Avinu nota arozim b'Mitzrayim, that Yaakov Avinu planted in Mitzrayim, and when he passed away, he commanded his sons to carry these items with them. Now, why was it so important that the Mishkan be made out of krashim that were planted by Yaakov Avinu? Why did he have to be matriach his children to take his wood, schlep it out over the Yam Suf, and let them use any wood? Why did they need to use these items that were designated and prepared by the Avos? Where the Briach HaTichain came from Avram Avinu, where the Krashim came from Yaakov Avinu. So you'll ask, no, what about Yitzchak Avinu? Did Yitzchak Avinu have any contribution to the Beis HaMikdash? And indeed he did. The Medrash in the Yalkut Shimoni says that they actually completed the construction of the Mishkan when? On Chanukah, on Chaf Hei Kislev. But the Rebbeinu Shalom said, let's wait until Rosh Chodesh Nisan for the birthday of Yitzchak Avinu to inaugurate the Mishkan. So even though technically Yitzchak Avinu did not donate to the Mishkan, but his very birth ushered in, heralded in the ultimate inauguration of the Mishkan. So we see that the Avos HaKadoshim played a very important role in the building of the Mishkan. The question is why? What would the connection be? Why would the Mishkan have to consist of items that came from the Avos HaKadoshim? So in order to understand this question, we have to have a deeper understanding on Sefer Shemos in general. The Ramban dubs Sefer Shemos Sefer HaGeula, the Book of Redemption. And once he gives it that name, the Ramban is bothered by the following question. The Ramban is troubled. What do you mean the Book of Geula? So then the book should end after Beshalach. Or maybe after Yisroi, because maybe Klal Yisrael did not achieve the purpose of Geula until the Torah was given. But what's Truma doing there? What's Tetzaveh doing there? What are all these parashiyos doing there? And the Ramban says a very important yediyah. Says the Ramban, Lo nechshavu Yisrael Geulim, Klal Yisrael were not considered redeemed until they were returned and reverted back to the Maila and the Madrega of the Avos HaKadoshim. Like the pasuk says, "V'zeh soid Eloika alei oihel," the secret of Hashem's presence on the tent. In other words, what we see from the Ramban is that Sefer Shemais brings the world back to the level that the world was on in Bereshis. In Bereshis, the world was on a certain level. That level was the Ribbon Shalom rested His divine presence on the tent of Abraham and Sarah, on Yitzchak and Rivka. And then because of the situation, because of the Averos of the time, the Shechina departed, the Shechina left. We're going to see, the Medrash tells us, that the Shechina went lamala from the Shiva Rakiyim, and not until the Shechina came back on the Mishkan were Klal Yisrael considered redeemed. So therefore, says the Ramban, that Shemais does not conclude until the donating of the Mishkan, the building of the Mishkan, and ultimately Sefer Shemais ends off. Ubiyois kavod Hashem malei oisai tamid. If you look at the last pasuk in Sefer Shemais, this gives us the clue to understand the entire Sefer. Sefer Shemais, we're going to read it next week. Usually Vayakel and Pekudei are together, but next week we're going to read Ki anan Hashem al hamishkan yoimam ve'eish tia layla boy le'einei beis Yisrael b'chol ma'aseihem. And now, wonderful, we're back to the Madrega of the world, where the Shechina rested on the tent of Abraham and Sarah. So even though technically they were redeemed in Beshalach, the full Geula was not experienced until the end of Sefer Shemais. So let's think about that. That means the whole purpose of the Mishkan. First of all, from here we learn a tremendous principle. If you were to ask, where is the Shechina primarily? Is it in a shul? Or where should the Shechina be? Is the Shechina in the Beis HaMikdash? No, Be'ikr, the Shechina was in the tent of Abraham and Sarah. The Mishkan was just an attempt to cause the Shechina to return to Klal Yisrael, similar to the way it was on the tent of Abraham and Sarah. But the Yikar Hashras HaShechina was in the tent of Tzadikim, in the tent of a Tzadik V'Rei. I remember when I was a Bachar, I grew up in Flatbush. You know where Flatbush is? It's in a country called New York. Yeah? And actually, the New York is the name of the continent. The country is Brooklyn. And I grew up on M31st. I don't know if you know Flatbush. And as a Bachar, I used to walk to Rav Avigdor Miller, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha. And this was one of his very important themes, that the Iker Hashras Hashchina is in a house of a Jew more than a Beis HaKnesses. A Beis HaKnesses is just an attempt to bring the Shechina into the home. The Iker Hashras Hashchina is the Jewish home. The home is the main resting place of the Shechina. The purpose of the Mishkan was to bring the Shechina back the way it was on the tent of Abraham and Sarah. So let's think for a moment. If the purpose of the Mishkan was to be a replica of the tent of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, now, says the Chikrei Lev, we understand why the Mishkan consisted of ingredients that came from Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We understand why the Briach HaTichain was from the Arazim of Abraham Avinu. We understand why the Krushim were from the Netiyos of Yaakov Avinu, because the whole purpose of the Mishkan was to bring the Shechina back the way it was in the home of the Avos HaKadoshim. So you say, yeah, no, but what about the Imahos? Because the purpose of the Mishkan was to bring the Shechina back to the tent of the Avos V'Imahos. Did the Imahos have a chelek? So it's interesting, because let's think for a moment. What were some of the miraculous aspects of the Mishkan? You had the Ner Ma'aravi never extinguished. You had the bread of the Lechem HaPanim that stayed fresh, Mishabbos to Shabbos. You had the Anan Hashem that was Shoira on the Mishkan. Well, that wasn't the first time these miracles appeared. Rashi tells us that when Yitzchak married Rivka, it says he brought her back, Ha'ayala Sarah Imai. And Rashi says the Yitzchak was able to tell that this was a Mamala Makaima of his mother Sarah, because the bread stayed fresh from Shabbos to Shabbos, and the Neiros were dalak the whole week. By the way, it's interesting. You know, there's one thing women are very makbid about. This is like the biggest no-no for ladies. It's not really such a big deal, but drinking from Havdalah, right? That's like one of the cardinal sins for a woman, chas v'shalom. to drink from Havdalah. Now it's important at the proper time to be able to dispel this misnomer. There is nothing wrong with a woman drinking from Havdalah. She doesn't need to, and in general she shouldn't. But she should be aware that if need be, she absolutely can drink from the Havdalah. So for example, if for whatever reason the husband's not around, she should make Havdalah herself and drink from it. Or if the husband was ready Yotzei, let her make her own Havdalah and drink from. So what's this thing that ladies don't like to drink from Havdalah? So the Shla HaKadosh says, what? Right. There's a book like that, Growing a Beard from Havdalah and other witchcraft. The reason is, the Shla HaKadosh brings down that Chava was mavdil between Adam and Hashem, so therefore she doesn't drink. But it's not asur, it's not a halacha, it's just, all things being equal, she doesn't drink from the Havdalah. But if she needs to be Yotze Havdalah, she should absolutely make it herself. But there's a sefer, Shailas Uchuvas Mishnas Sachir, of Rabbi Sachar Doiv Teichtal. And there he has a haskama from Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. And Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld says that in his opinion, the reason why women don't drink from the wine of Havdalah is because women, he says, why was it that in the tent of Sarah, the candle stayed lit from Shabbos to Shabbos? He says women are on the madrega that they're davuk to Shabbos the whole week. For a woman, her whole week is connected to Shabbos. She's either, he doesn't say this, she's either cleaning up or preparing for the next Shabbos. Women live with Shabbos. So because they're so davuk to Shabbos, they can't bring themselves to be mavdil from Shabbos, so they refrain from drinking from the wine of Havdalah. Be it as it may, so it comes out, when we look at the Mishkan was merely a replica, a semblance of the great Shechina that existed on the tent of Avraham and Sarah, namely all those miracles that occurred in the tent of Avraham and Sarah replicated themselves in the Mishkan. So this is the approach that I saw in the Sefer Chikrei Lev. Chikrei Lev was written by Rabbi Aryeh Leib Haiman. He has a very interesting sefer. And again, in a nutshell, the idea is the purpose of the Mishkan is to bring the world back to the Madrega of Shechina on the tent of Avraham and Sarah. And therefore we understand why many of the items that were donated indeed came from Avraham, from Yaakov. It was built on the birthday of Yitzchak Avinu. And many of the miracles were a replica of those miracles that took place in the tent of Abraham and Sarah. I would like to, based on this approach, take it to the next level. Because if we study carefully the items that were donated to the Mishkan, we'll notice they didn't just come from the Avos HaKadoshim, but we have a number of items that had an even more supernatural origin. Let's come to this week's Parsha. Because I think it's said on the sign that we're talking about this week's Parsha, right? You know, in America, I could get away with doing a different Parsha because they're not so proper in America. But in England, if it says you're going to speak about the Parsha, you have to speak about the Parsha, right? That's like the law. Okay, so I'm going to do that, don't worry. But I want everyone to be comfortable. Let's come to this week's Parsha. We have a pasuk, V'hanasiyim heviu es avnei hashayham ve'es avnei hamiluim la'efaid v'la'choyshen ve'es haboisem ve'es hashamen. The Nesiyim brought the avnei shayham and the avnei miluim. So, what does this mean, the Nesiyim brought? Rashi says, literally, the Nesiyim were the ones who donated it. Rashi says that when it came to the Chanukas, when it came to donating the items, the Nesiyim said, yeah, whatever you guys don't bring, we're going to bring. They underestimated the generous spirit of the Jewish people. There's nothing left for them to bring. So what did they bring? They brought these special items, the Avnei Shayham and the Avnei Miluim. Rashi says, but that was not a proper approach. They should have come right away. And therefore what letter is missing from the word V'hanasiyim? Yod. So perhaps it occurred to me, is there anything wrong with what the Nesiyim did? They didn't do anything wrong. They brought very expensive items. What was wrong is with what they thought, their machshava. In Tikkunei Zayar it brings the letter Yud denotes machshava. So perhaps that's the reason why they're missing the letter Yud. Otherwise, you could take out any letter. Why do we take out the letter Yud? What was chasar was in their machshava. However, in the Targum Hamayuchas Yonasan ben Uziel, he says a different shot in Vahanasiyim Heviu. Take a look at number 14 if you have a sheet. Says Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, Va'anone Shemaya Ozlin Lepishain. The clouds of heaven. Vahanasiyim doesn't mean the leaders, the princes. Nasiyim means the clouds. The clouds went to Pishain. V'dalyan mitaman, they lifted up from there. Yas avnei vorlevas chala, v'yas avnei ashlamusa, the avnei shayam and the avnei miluim. So in other words, the origins of the avnei shayam and the avnei miluim were clouds that came and took them from Mitzrayim. And then he continues. Pasuk Chavches, v'soyven anonei shemaya v'ozlin legan Eden. The clouds went to the Garden of Eden. V'nosvin mitaman, and they lifted from there yas busma b'chira, the shemen hamishcha, v'yas mishcha dezeisa, the boisem, and the shemen hamishcha, v'yas afarsma dachya, and the pure afarsamoin. So Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says the shemen lamar and the besam l'shemen hamishcha v'lektar sasamim came from none other than Gan Eden. Why did it have to come from Gan Eden? Why couldn't they go to the local convenience store? What do they have here? I don't know. Excuse my, 7-Eleven. I know they don't have that over there, right? Yeah. Walmart. They do have it? Mazel tov. Baruch Hashem. What?
They're in the desert.
They're in the desert. I mean, why do they need to come from Gan Eden? What's the yichus that these items came from Gan Eden? So now, according to Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, the Avnei Sham Avnei Miluim came from Mitzrayim, and the Besamim, the Shemen HaMishcha, and the Ktar Sasamim, and the Shemen Lamar came from Gan Eden. But if you look in the Sefer Gematriyos of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, he brings a medrash that the Mefarshim say we don't know his makar, that not only did the clouds bring the Shemen Lamar and the Besamim Shemen HaMishcha and the Ktar Sasamim, but the clouds also brought the Shemen the Avnei Shayam and the Avnei Miluim. So it comes out very interesting that the Mishkan not only consisted of ingredients from Abraham, from Yaakov, it also consisted of number and many ingredients that came from none other than Gan Eden itself. So following, by the way, I'm going to share with you a chidah, an unbelievable chidah. There's a small discrepancy between Truma and Vayakel. In Truma it says Sahav v'chesef u'nechayshes u'secheles v'argaman v'soyla shani v'sheish v'yizim v'ayrois elim adamim v'ayrois rashim v'asei shitim shemen lamar. What do you mean shemen? What happened to the vav? All the other donations have vavs. You ever notice that in Truma? The 15 donations by shemen, by the word shemen, there's no vav. In Vayakel, it's Vishemen Lama'ar. What's the pshat? Says the Chidah in the Sefer Nachal Kidumim, he heard from one of his relatives, Reb Ze'evi. He says something out of this world. In Truma it says, V'zois HaTruma, it says, V'yikchu li teruma. Meiz kol ish, asher yidvenu libay, tikchu es terumasi, my truma. And then it says, V'zois ha-truma, asher tikchu me'itam, your truma. So who's giving it? God or the Jewish people? The answer is, yesh v'yesh. Some of the things the Jewish people gave. The Jewish people gave zahav, v'chesef, u'nechayshes, u'secheles, v'argaman, v'soyla shani, v'sheish, v'oyrois elim adim, v'oyrois chashim, v'atzei shitim. That's v'zois ha-truma asher tikchu me'itam. Me'itam. But what's the truma seed that I'm giving? That's shemen lama'ar. That the Rebbeinu Shalom gave. How did the Rebbeinu Shalom gave? Go to Vayakel. In Vayakel, it's that these are the items that v'hanasiyim heviu, the clouds brought them either from Mitzrayim or from Gan Eden. That's the reason for the missing vav. The mystery of the missing vav has been uncovered. So you'll ask, why in Vayakel Is there a vav? So I would say, according to this chidah, it's very beautiful. In Vayakel, just listing all the items that were brought. It doesn't differentiate between truma si and asher tikchu me'itam. So it doesn't differentiate. It does have a vav. In truma, it breaks it up into two categories. So there's no vav. So now we're learning, not only were there unusual and supernatural ingredients from the Avos HaKadoshim, there were even ingredients from Gan Eden. So I ask you, friends, why in the world did we need items from Gan Eden to build the Mishkan? So now let's take this Ramban and bring it to the next level. Because Ramban learns that the purpose of the Mishkan was to bring the world back to the way it was on the tent of Abraham and Sarah. But let's ask ourselves, because we know the Bahag says that Bereshis is book 1 and Shemais is book 2. That really means Shemais should be bringing the world not only back to the way it was in the tent of Abraham and Sarah, but really it should be bringing the world back to the way it was Began Eden Mikadam. And in fact, the pasuk says that when the Mishkan was built, Vayehi b'yayim Vayehi. The Medrash says whenever you see the word Vayehi, it means something was reverted to the way it was originally. What is this referring to? Says the Medrash, if you look at number 18, Davar shahaya ufasak v'chayzer lekamay shahaya. That originally, in the beginning of creation, the Shechina was shoyra b'tachtoinim shenemar vayishmu es koil Hashem mishalech bagan. Friends, in your zechus, the following idea just occurred to me. Think about the parallel. When the koil Hashem emanated from the kruvim, bibein shnei kruvim, it was a replica of Vayishmu es hakoil Elokim mishalech bagan. You know, when we read the pasuk, Vayishmu es koil Elokim mishalech bagan, we just say, oh, Hashem was calling out to them. No, the state of the world was that the voice of Hashem emanated from Gan Eden in such a powerful way that the Mishkan was just a replica of that. By the way, in Shiurim Rabbah, it brings on the words Basi Lagani, that after the Shechina was in Gan Eden, because of the sin of Adam HaRishon, Nistalek HaShechina l'Rakiah HaRishon, and then because of Kayin, it went to the Rakiah Sheni, and because of Bimei Enosh, it went to Shlishi, and the Dar HaMarbel went to Ravi, and the Dar HaMigdal Chamishi, Anshe Sodom Shishi, in Mitzrayim it went up to Shvi, and then Avraham came down, and he brought it down a notch, and Yitzchak brought it down, and Yaakov brought it down, and finally it did not return to this world until the day the Mishkan was built. So I'm very into the Chidah. I feel a very close connection with the Chidah. Chidah had a great-great-grandfather, Rav Avram Azulai, who he usually refers to as his grandfather. And someone actually once had the chutzpah to ask the Chidah, stop calling him your grandfather. He's not your grandfather. He's your great-great-grandfather. I mean, imagine if I told my grandfather, Rashi. But he is my grandfather. He's probably your grandfather also. But, I mean, he's quite a few generations back. So the Chidah wrote a tshuva justifying why he's allowed to refer to his great-great-grandfather as his grandfather. And he brings many rayos, you're allowed to do that. The Chesed Avram paints the following picture. He says, originally Adam HaRishon was put in Gan Eden. Yeah? So why did he need the rest of the world? So he says, the rest of the world he needed for his uvdin d'chayil, for his mundane activities. Gan Eden was like his Beis HaMikdash, the Chesed Avram says. Gan Eden was like the Beis HaMikdash of Adam HaRishon. So we're starting to get an imagery that the purpose of the Mishkan was not just to bring the world back to the way it was on the tent of Abraham and Sarah, but is to recreate the original intention of creation where the Shechina rested in Gan Eden. Now I want to share something with you. This alone is worth the price of admission. When Hashem chased Adam HaRishon out of Gan Eden, do you remember the pasuk? Vayigaresh es ha'adam vayashkein mikedem Gan Eden eis hakruvim. And they had Lad HaMisapeches. And we think, these Keruvim, they were these very vicious, destructive angels standing there, brandishing their sword back and forth. Okay, that's how Rashi seems to learn. But if you look in Tana D'Belio in number 23, Tana D'Belio says, Vayashkein mikedem legan eden es hakruvim. Mikedem doesn't mean the east. Mikedem means before. Vayashkein mikedem legan eden melamed shehakruvim kadmu l'chol masa bereshis. The first act of creation was the kruvim. That's a good trivia question. What did Hashem create before Shamayim va'aretz? The kruvim of Gan Eden. And what were those kruvim doing? Before the world was created, you had vicious malachim waving their sword. Back to Targum, Hamayuchas Liyanis Menuziel. Look at number 22. Uterad Yas Adam. Hashem chased out Adam. Min de Ashri Yikar Shchinte. From the place that Hashem rested His Shechina, Min Lekadmin, from the beginning of time, Bein Train Kruvaya, between the two Kruvim in Gan Eden. According to Targum Yonis ben Uziel, these weren't destructive Kruvim. Gan Eden was the Beis HaMikdash, and the Koil Hashem was Mishalech Bagon, and it rested on two Kruvim. Gan Eden was an actual Mishkan, and the Shechina rested there, and that's why Hashem created them before the world, because that was Hashras HaShechina. And then because of the sin of Adam, it went up a notch. And then the sin of Enosh went up a notch. Until finally they chased Hashem out. And now we understand, it comes out very beautiful, that the building of the Mishkan was not just the restoration of the Shechina to the way it was on the tent of Abraham and Sarah, but it was literally bringing the world back to the way the world was in Gan Eden Mikedem. So the end of Shemais, the Parshas we read now, bring the world back to the beginning of Bereshis. That's why Bereshis and Shemais are book 1 and book 2. Book 2 brings the world back to the way it was in the very beginning of book 1. It's a revolutionary understanding of the function of the Kruvim. We read these psukim and we maintain our, the understanding of the Kruvim that we had, when we were 6 years old. But that's not the actual meaning of the Kruvim. We should envision Gan Eden as a Makom Hashras HaShechina. And the function of the Kruvim is that was the Makom where the Shechina rested. And the Koil Hashem Mishalech Bagon was like the voice emanating Mibein Shnei HaKruvim in the Mishkan itself. And now I think we understand why it was important that the items donated to the Mishkan not only came from the Avos, but came from Gan Eden. Now we understand why V'hanasiyim Heviu, the Avnei Shayham, and the Avnei Miluim, and the Shemen Lamar, and the Misam and the Shemen HaMishcha, why all of these items came, mamish, from Gan Eden itself, because that's the whole purpose of the Mishkan, to bring the world back to Gan Eden. Do you remember the Mishnah in Avos that 10 miracles took place every day in the Beis HaMikdash? Some of them were, no woman miscarried, the meat didn't rot, there were no flies. The Chassid Yavitz, not to be confused with Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Yavitz, here, Rabbi Yaakov Emden was Yaakov ben Tzvi, Yavitz. The Chassid Yavitz is Yitain Eitza Be'ez Tzara. He was one of the Gerushei Sfarad. He explains that these 10 miracles were because when Hashem created the world originally, Adam HaRishon in Gan Eden, there was no death, there was no decomposition, there was no degeneration, everything was preserved. And even though that state and that existence ceased, there was one small area in the world that preserved the supernatural state of being where nothing decomposes and nothing degenerates, the way the world was before the sin of Adam HaRishon, and that is the Mikdash, the Chassid Yavitz says, was a little self-enclosed area where the existence remained in the way it was before the sin of Adam HaRishon. So again, we see this idea that the Beis HaMikdash was literally a restoration of the way things were before the sin of Adam HaRishon. And now we understand the deeper meaning of the Medrash, that we say at the end of Megillas Eicha. Hashivenu Hashem Elecha v'nashuva Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. The Medrash says, what do you mean Kekedem? We think it means Hashem, rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, bring things back the way they were when the Beis HaMikdash stood. No, says the Medrash. Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem Ka'adam Harishain Began Eden Mikedem. Why at the end of Eicha, when we're mourning the Beis HaMikdash, are we asking Hashem to bring things back to the way it was in Gan Eden Mikedem? What does Adam Harishon got to do with the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? But according to this approach, it's crystal clear. The whole purpose of the Mishkan and the Mikdash was to create an enclosed area in the world where the existence of Adam Harishon before the sin was preserved. So therefore we're mispalel, Ribono Shel Olam, rebuild the Beis HaMikdash so you could restore the world to the way it was, mamish, began Eden mikadem. So we read Parshiyos Vayakel Pekudei, we read about V'hanasiim Heviu, and we see the beautiful symmetry of Torasenu HaKadosha, that whatever was lost from the greatness and the grandeur of Avraham and Sarah, but even more than that, whatever was lost from the very beginning of Bereshis, Be'ez Hashem, by the end of next week, the world reverts back to the way it was in the very beginning, and Vayikra is, so to speak, a very new beginning. That's where children start Limud HaTorah, because it's like a brand new world. Began Eden Mikadem. Thank you very much. Agun Shabbos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.